Hi, welcome to week 9 of the Sociology of Work and Technology. Today and this week, we're going to talk about place and the materiality of place in the digital economy.
Gonna be alright, 'cause the players wanna play, 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 and the haters wanna hate, 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 hate. I just wanna shake, 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 shake it all.
So this week's readings directly concern place in the contemporary economy. When we think of the digital economy, we often talk about the internet or virtual worlds online. We might even talk about remote work or the virtualization of organizations. You got a little bit of that when we read about algocracy. We often forget about place and how much place affects where and how people work. Even if work is online or remote, it still occurs somewhere. Take, for example, this course. We meet online, or you view these lectures on YouTube or through OnQ. But this lecture takes place somewhere. My home. You view these lectures wherever you are. Some of you are in Queens dormitories. Some of you are in apartments. Some of you are in your parents' homes. Some of you are in Kingston, while others are in some other part of Ontario or another province altogether. Some of you are even in China or perhaps another country. While we're online, we're also physically in a particular place with particular materialities. Work's materiality, or the stuff, the objects that we encounter at work, is crucially important to how we feel. Now, when I say feel, I mean like the vibe that you're kind of riding on while you're doing whatever it is you're doing. Not necessarily an emotion, but, like the vibe. How work feels is shaped by this materiality of work, the stuff that we encounter, the objects that we work through and upon, the stuff that's around us. If you think back a few weeks, we already saw a little bit of this in the readings from Ben Highmore and myself on how technology impinges upon the body, or how technology affects the body. We see this again in the article from Dr. David Grazian from the journal Theory and Society. Grazian's professor of sociology and communication at the University of Pennsylvania. So, in the context of contemporary work, the situation that we read about before fall break, in this context, which often takes place in networked or algocratic organizations, where people often work as independent contractors who lack job security, where people are encouraged to be self-employed, entrepreneurs. They're encouraged to do so at the expense of economic stability. In this context, Grazian decided to research co-working spaces. What goes on there exactly, you might say? Well, he's asking, how do these places, these co-working spaces, attempt to brand themselves to attract these independent contractors or creative workers to come and use this co-working space? How is it that what do they try to do there to get to brand themselves? Now, these are mostly an urban phenomenon in that they mostly appear in major metropolitan areas due to the abundance of people who might use them and due to the costliness of office space in major urban centers. Just look on Kijiji or Craigslist to see what office space goes for in, say, Toronto or Montreal. That said, these kinds of spaces are also popping up in places like Kingston. For example, downtown, there are a few co-working spaces. Grazian shows how these places attempt to appeal to independent contractors and entrepreneurs who use these spaces, and he does so to demonstrate the importance of place and materiality in the virtual, digital, or supposedly immaterial economy. As he says, co-working spaces rely on aesthetics, ideology, and style to brand their workspaces to members while promoting new economy work as meaningful, collaborative, creative, and fun. Now, he's not saying that this is actually true. He's saying that this is how the companies present themselves to workers. He's not arguing that new economy work is meaningful, collaborative, creative, and fun. He's saying that these places frame this kind of new economy work in that way. Okay? So how does he show this? How does he come to the conclusion that this is how these companies frame work to these workers? Well, he bases his observations here on months and months of ethnographic fieldwork. He went and hung out in these places. He worked there. He spent 400 hours working in these spaces around Manhattan, which is the main part of New York City in the US. And then he spent an additional 16 months in other cities around the East Coast of the United States, in places like Wi-Fi enabled coffee shops and other spaces that are used by workers and entrepreneurs who don't have access to a regular workspace. So what did he find? Well, he found that these places tended to frame themselves and to decorate the spaces in ways that promoted work as being fun, as creative, as exciting, as full of passion. Now, Grazian doesn't say this, but from my point of view, the ways that these spaces promote themselves, it really resembles the sort of management discourse from the 1990s that Boltanski and Chiapello were describing. So, while Grazian simply argues that the digital economy exists in very specific places, and that it is in fact dependent upon those places, I would go further and say that these co-working spaces promote the new spirit of capitalism that was described by Boltanski and Chiapello. These spaces frame work as passion, something to be loved, but of course, as Sarah Jaffe, who's a labor journalist, recently said, work won't ever love you back, no matter how much you love it. Now, spreading this view of work, that it's something one ought to love, that one ought to dedicate one's whole self to work, this is the ideological framing performed by co-working spaces. These spaces also engage workers aesthetically through their decor, which is intended to exhibit a particular sensibility or a particular taste profile. This is done not only to appeal to workers, but also to enable the workers who use these spaces, the members of these co-working spaces, to use the objects as the backdrop for their work projects. So, for example, the setting of a co-working space provides the background of one's video call, much like my home office provides the background for this lecture, which you'll notice I had to change angles due to a faulty camera that I normally use. So, for example, the setting of a co-working space, like I said, provides the background of a video call. So having cool stuff or whatever is around might aid workers in creating a desired impression on whoever they're conversing with. These decorations further equate work with passion and creativity, as they include quotes from counterculture icons like Jack Kerouac, or they have images of heavy metal bands, or other things that are inviting people to love their work, to express themselves, that frame work in this way. Right? Some have signs that say things like good vibes only, or stay weird. Work is presented as a thing to be cherished, even enjoyed, as in the phrase, thank God it's Monday, which is, of course, a reversal of the usual thank God it's Friday. And this thank God it's Monday slogan celebrates the beginning of the working week, as if one should be excited to go to work every day. This is the same ideology that's described by Melissa Gregg in her writing on the productivity obsession, which we read last week. And we see that replicated here, concretely, observably. Now, there are different types of these spaces, there are different variants, and some are more oriented toward men, while others cater more to the needs and interests of women who use these spaces. Ostensibly, this market segmentation helps workers build community, but that doesn't seem to really be the case when you read what Grazian finds. These spaces don't really help build community at all, even if they do seem to provide opportunities for doing so. Grazian found that people complained about how little they interacted with each other, which I think is quite sad because in such a hyper-individualized world of work, community might just be what everyone needs most. So with that, I'll see y'all next time when we think more about place in the digital economy, taking a trip to a blockchain chicken farm in the countryside of China. I'll see you then.